You stopped explaining yourself and something in the room changed. Not because you got louder, because you got quieter, and quiet, done on purpose, is the most disorienting thing a person can experience. Here is a number that should bother you. Most people spend more energy narrating their lives than living them. Announcing the plan, defending the decision, updating everyone on the progress. That energy has to come from somewhere, and it's coming from the part of you that could be building instead. You already know this feeling. You changed something about yourself, quietly, and the people who knew the old version got strange about it. Not hostile exactly. Unsettled. Like you'd broken a rule nobody wrote down. That reaction is not random, and by the end of this you'll understand exactly what it's protecting. This is not a video about setting boundaries. This is about a psychological mechanism the Swiss psychiatrist Carl Jung mapped almost a century ago, one that explains why your silence has more power than your explanations ever did. The promise is simple and it is not small. You are going to stop needing an audience to become someone else. Your transformation is going to happen in the dark, where nobody can interrupt it, argue with it, or slow it down. And the people who only knew the old you are going to feel it before you say a single word about it. Think about the last time you watched someone go quiet after a hard season, someone who used to post everything, explain everything, and then suddenly didn't. You probably assumed something was wrong. Maybe you even reached out, worried. And when they resurfaced months later, they weren't broken. They were different, in a way that had nothing to do with what they said, and everything to do with what they'd quietly built while nobody was watching. That gap, the one that made you uneasy, was never a crisis. It was the machinery of change, running exactly the way it's supposed to, away from an audience that would have slowed it down. You are about to understand that machinery well enough to use it on purpose. Let's start with the part nobody tells you. For most of your life, you were taught that growth is something you show. You post the update. You explain the pivot. You announce the new version of yourself before it even exists, hoping the announcement will make it real. But identity doesn't work that way, and Jung understood this better than almost anyone in the history of psychology. He spent his career studying how a person becomes who they actually are, a process he called individuation. And one thing kept showing up in every case study, every patient, every letter he wrote about his own inner life. The real transformation always happened first in silence. The talking came after, if it came at all. So here's the tension we're going to sit inside for the next several minutes. You have been taught that visibility equals progress. Jung's work suggests almost the opposite, that the moment you stop performing your growth for other people is the exact moment it stops being performance and starts being real. Strategic silence isn't avoidance. It isn't hiding. It's a withdrawal of access. And access is the one thing every relationship, every workplace, every family system runs on. When you stop giving people your plans, your justifications, your play-by-play, you take something away from them. Not affection. Not respect. Predictability. And a person who can no longer predict you, can no longer influence you. That's the mechanism. That's what this entire video is going to unpack, piece by piece, until you understand exactly why going quiet is one of the most powerful things a human being can do. Let's talk about a distinction Jung made that most people never learn because it's not taught in school, and it's uncomfortable once you see it. The difference between intelligence and consciousness. Intelligence is processing power. It's how fast you connect dots, solve problems, win arguments. Consciousness is something else entirely. It's whether you're awake inside your own behavior, or running on a script you never chose. Jung worked with brilliant people who were, in his words, almost entirely unconscious of their own motivations. Smart enough to justify anything. Aware of almost nothing underneath the justification. Think about the last time you explained a decision to someone, not because they needed the information but because you needed them to approve of it. That reflex, the need to narrate yourself into acceptance, is intelligence working overtime to serve an unconscious need. You reasoned your way into permission you never needed to ask for. Consciousness looks different. A conscious person can make the same decision and simply make it. No press release. No preemptive defense. Because they're not asking the room for permission, they already gave it to themselves. This is the first thing silence does. It separates the part of you that's clever from the part of you that's actually awake. You cannot talk your way into consciousness. You can only do your way into it, quietly, one undefended decision at a time. And here's the uncomfortable part Jung kept returning to. Unconscious people don't just miss this distinction in themselves. They punish it in others. Think about the people in your life who talk the most about their own self-awareness. Half the time that's not consciousness. That's intelligence, dressed up, performing the language of awareness while avoiding the actual work of it. Jung was careful to separate the two because confusing them is how a smart person can spend a whole lifetime explaining themselves brilliantly, without ever once changing. Consciousness doesn't announce itself with vocabulary. It shows up as a gap, a small, quiet gap between an impulse and an action, where a choice actually gets made instead of a reflex firing on autopilot. Most people never notice that gap exists, because they've never gone quiet long enough to find it. Silence is what creates the gap. Every time you don't immediately explain, defend, or perform, you widen it just slightly, and inside that widened gap is the only place real choice has ever lived. Which brings us to the next mechanism. The one that explains why your quiet transformation makes some people so visibly uneasy. Before we go further, sit with this for a second. What is one thing you've been narrating out loud that you could simply start doing instead? Write it down. You'll need it later. Now, back to the mechanism because it's about to get sharper. Human beings are, underneath the individuality we like to believe in, deeply herd-driven animals. Jung didn't dismiss this as a flaw. He treated it as a psychological force, one strong enough to override a person's private judgment almost completely. He called the collective pull of a group its own kind of psyche, one with a gravity that pulls individual thought toward the average. Not the best thought in the room. The average one. Here's where it gets personal. A group doesn't just influence what people believe. It regulates what people are allowed to become without ever saying so out loud. You felt this? The friend group that has a role for you and gets quietly cold when you outgrow it. The family that raised you to be a certain way and treats your growth like a betrayal of the family contract. Nobody signed anything. Nobody said the rule out loud. But you knew it existed because you felt the temperature drop the moment you stepped outside it. Jung's point was blunt. The mass mind does not reward development, it rewards conformity, because conformity is predictable and predictability is safe for the group, even when it's a slow death for the individual inside it. This is why silence is such a threat to the collective. When you stop explaining your changes, you stop offering the group something to evaluate, approve, or correct. You take yourself out of the group's feedback loop entirely. And a system that runs on feedback does not know what to do with someone who stopped submitting reports. That's not paranoia. That's structure. The mass mind needs your explanations the way a machine needs fuel, and every time you withhold one, you starve a system that was quietly shaping you into its average. Here's a detail Jung noticed that most people overlook entirely. The mass mind doesn't need to be big to work on you. Two people can be a mass mind if you've handed them the authority to evaluate your choices. A parent, a partner, a single close friend whose opinion you check before you commit to anything. The size of the group is irrelevant. What matters is whether you've outsourced your sense of, am I allowed to do this, to someone outside yourself. Jung's patients who broke free of this pattern didn't do it by arguing with the group, or convincing it to change its mind. They did it by quietly removing the group's job. The job of deciding whether the new version of you was acceptable. You take that job back the moment you stop asking and simply act. Now here's a harder question underneath all of this. Why does the truth about your own change scare other people so much that they'd rather misread you than sit with it? Jung spent decades with patients whose minds would do almost anything to avoid a threatening truth. Not because they were weak. Because the psyche is built, first and foremost, to protect the sense of self it already has. A truth that confirms who you already are feels like oxygen. A truth that threatens who you already are feels like an attack, and the mind will defend against an attack, even when the attack is just information. Here's the specific case Jung kept encountering in his clinical work. A patient would be shown, gently, a pattern in their own behavior, something obvious to everyone around them. And instead of relief, they'd feel rage. Not at the pattern. At the person who pointed it out. Jung called this resistance, and he noted something crucial. The size of the reaction tells you the size of the threat to the identity underneath it. Small annoyance, small threat. Explosive defensiveness, a threat to something the person has built their entire sense of self around. Now apply that to you going quiet. When you stop over-explaining your growth and simply demonstrate it through action, you become a walking piece of evidence. Evidence that change doesn't require permission. Evidence that the version of you people got comfortable with was never the whole truth to begin with. And for someone still attached to the old identity of the group, of the relationship, of who you used to be. That evidence is unbearable not because you did anything to them but because your existence now contradicts a story they needed to be true. You didn't attack them. You just stopped agreeing to be predictable, and that alone can feel, to a threatened identity, like an act of war. Jung noticed something else worth naming here because it explains why some people won't even engage with the truth directly. They'll go around it. They'll suddenly remember an old story about you, a mistake from years ago, and bring it up like fresh evidence, as if the past version of you disqualifies the current one from being real. That's not memory. That's defense dressed up as a fact check. The mind reaches for the old story because the old story is safe, predictable, already survived once. The new story, the one where you actually changed, hasn't been tested yet, and untested truths are exactly what a threatened identity avoids at all costs. You don't need to correct the record. You don't need to relitigate the past to prove the present. Let the old story be old. Your job now is simply to keep being the evidence, quietly, consistently, until the old story stops being useful to anyone. Which brings us to the part almost nobody names correctly because it's easier to call the other person jealous or insecure and leave it there. Jung had a sharper word for it: projection. Specifically, projection of what he called the shadow. The shadow is the part of a person they've disowned, the traits, desires, and potential they were never allowed to develop, so they buried them and pretended those parts didn't exist. Here's the mechanism, and it's more precise than jealousy. A buried trait doesn't disappear. It goes looking for a place to land. And the safest place to put an unbearable truth about yourself is onto someone else, someone who happens to be doing the exact thing you were too afraid to do. That's you, going quiet and becoming someone new without asking permission. You didn't just change. You became a mirror for everything the people around you decided long ago they were too afraid to become. This is why the reactions rarely make logical sense. Why silence gets read as arrogance. Why growth gets read as rejection. Why a person who has done nothing to another human being can still be labeled cold, selfish, distant. By people who are actually describing a capacity they buried in themselves. Jung's clinical insight here matters. The more disowned the trait, the more intense the projection. That's why the people most unsettled by your quiet transformation are often the ones closest to a version of it they never let themselves have. You are not responsible for their shadow. But you should recognize it when you see it because it will try to convince you that you are the problem, when you are simply the mirror. Jung gave one piece of practical advice about the shadow that applies directly here, and it's easy to miss because it sounds almost too simple. Don't explain yourself to the projection. You cannot argue someone out of a shadow they haven't consciously met yet, because the argument isn't happening with you, it's happening with the buried part of themselves you accidentally activated. Every defense you offer becomes new material. New evidence for whatever story they've already decided to tell about you. This is precisely why silence works better than justification here. Silence gives the projection nowhere new to land. It just sits there, unfed, until it either fades or forces the other person to finally look at what it's actually about, which was never you to begin with. Let's connect what we've covered so far because it's about to lead somewhere Jung considered the most important and the most misunderstood discovery of his entire career. Real quick, before we go there, this is usually the point in the video where I'd ask you to hit subscribe, so let's make it mean something instead of just asking for a click. The thing you're doing right now, watching this, sitting with these ideas instead of scrolling past them, is itself a quiet act of individuation. Nobody's clapping for it. Nobody even knows you're doing it. That's the whole point. If any of this is landing, staying subscribed means you'll be here for the next piece of the mechanism, the part that explains what happens on the other side of the silence, when the discomfort stops being a cost, and starts being proof you're finally headed somewhere real. Let's keep going. Jung called the process you've been walking through individuation, the lifelong work of becoming the specific, undivided person you actually are, instead of the composite of roles, expectations, and inherited scripts you were handed. And here is the part he was almost apologetic about in his own writing. Individuation is, structurally, a lonely process. Not because something is wrong with you. Because the process requires you to separate from what he called the persona, the mask built entirely out of what a group needed you to be. Every time you were rewarded for playing a role, that mask got a little thicker. The good daughter. The reliable friend. The one who never causes problems. Individuation means taking that mask off, and here's the part nobody warns you about. Some of the people who love the mask will not automatically love what's underneath it. That's not a flaw in you. That is the exact price of becoming specific instead of generic. A generic person fits everywhere and belongs nowhere. A specific person belongs somewhere real but not everywhere. And that trait is the loneliness Jung was talking about. It's not punishment. It's sorting. The relationships built on your mask will thin out. The ones built on the actual you, the one underneath, will get stronger, sharper, more honest than they've ever been. Silence accelerates this sorting because you stop performing the mask for people who only ever love the performance. You go quiet and the mask lovers get uncomfortable and drift. You go quiet and the ones who see you lean in closer because they don't need the narration to know who you are. This is not isolation. This is individuation doing exactly what it was always going to do, whether you cooperated with it or not. There's a specific detail from Jung's own account of this period, one he described in his later writing about the years he called his confrontation with the unconscious. He didn't announce that period to his colleagues. He didn't publish updates. He went quiet, worked alone, and let years pass before the world saw what had actually happened inside that silence. Some of his peers thought he'd lost his professional footing entirely. He wasn't losing anything. He was building something, in the one place building like that can actually happen, which is away from an audience that would have tried to talk him out of it, argue him back into the acceptable version of himself. That's the model. Not permanent isolation. A season of it, deliberate and undefended, long enough for the real structure to finish forming before it has to survive contact with anyone else's opinion. Now let's talk about what silence actually takes from other people, because this is where the personal power becomes obvious. You've heard knowledge is power. Jung's work points to something sharper. Predictability is power, and it's the currency that manipulation runs on entirely. Think about how influence actually works on a person. It requires knowing what they'll do next, what argument will move them, what guilt trip will land, what silence will make them anxious enough to over-explain themselves back into line. Every one of those levers depends on information you provided. Your announced plans, your public justifications, your need to be understood right now by everyone all at once. When you stop supplying that information, the levers stop working, not because you got stronger in some abstract sense, but because there's nothing left to pull. This is Jung's real insight about independent thought. It's not just an intellectual position, it's a psychological exit from being predictable. A person capable of independent thought doesn't announce the exit, they simply stop being where people expect them to be, emotionally, reactively, informationally. That's what makes them impossible to manipulate. Not confidence. Absence of the data manipulation requires. Here's a specific case Jung noted in patients moving through this stage. The ones furthest along stopped answering questions they used to answer instantly. Not out of spite. Out of a new, quiet awareness that not every question deserves their reflex. That pause, that half second of not immediately explaining, is the entire mechanism of this video condensed into a single habit. You are not obligated to make yourself legible to everyone who asks. And every time you remember that, you take one more lever out of someone else's hands. There's a second layer to this Jung pointed to, one that's easy to miss. Manipulation doesn't just need your information. It needs your anxiety about withholding it. The guilt that shows up when you don't answer right away. The itch to fill silence with reassurance, just so the other person's discomfort stops being your problem. That itch is trained, not natural, and it can be untrained the same way it was built, through repetition. Every time you let a silence sit and survive it without rushing in to smooth it over, the itch gets a little quieter. Eventually it stops being a struggle at all, and starts being simply how you move through a room, unbothered by questions that were never actually yours to answer. We're getting close to the part of this that Jung considered almost dangerous to say out loud, so let's be precise about it. Everything we've covered so far has a cost, and pretending it doesn't would be a lie. The people who lose access to you will not always go quietly. Some will escalate. They'll accuse you of changing for attention, which is almost funny considering attention is the exact thing you stopped asking for. They'll call you cold, when what actually happened is that you stopped performing warmth on command. They'll tell you that you've become different, and they will say it like an accusation when it is, in fact, the entire point. Jung didn't sugarcoat this stage. He described it as a kind of psychological exile, a period where the individuating person belongs fully to no group, because they've outgrown the old one, and haven't yet found the new one built for who they're becoming. This is the part most people quit at. The silence gets uncomfortable enough, the exile gets lonely enough, that they break and go back to over-explaining, back to narrating, back to asking for approval they had already learned to live without. This is the stage where you'll be tempted to reach for proof. To collect receipts, gather evidence, build a case for why the misunderstanding is unfair. Resist that. The moment you start building a case, you've handed the jury back its power, the very power you spent this entire video learning to take away. Here is the question that determines whether you make it through this stage or not. Are you willing to be misunderstood by people who benefited from misunderstanding you? Because that misunderstanding is not a sign you're doing something wrong. It is, according to Jung's own framework, close to the most reliable evidence available that the transformation is real. If nobody noticed, nothing changed. The discomfort you're feeling right now is the receipt. Keep it. Jung also noted something that offers real comfort here if you let it. The exile is not permanent. It's a crossing, not a destination. On the other side of it are the relationships that were never threatened by your growth in the first place, the ones that don't need you to stay small to feel comfortable around you. You don't meet those people by staying where you were. You meet them by finishing the crossing, which means walking through the uncomfortable middle instead of turning back the moment it gets quiet. The middle is the only part that feels like loss. What's waiting past it rarely does. Now, the part that matters most, because power without wisdom curdles into something ugly fast. Jung warned about this exact failure mode, and it deserves to be said plainly. The goal here is not to become cold, superior, or detached from other people out of some new sense of secret enlightenment. That version of awakening is just the ego wearing a new mask, one that says, "I see through everyone," while quietly building the exact prison it claims to have escaped. Real lucidity doesn't need an audience to confirm it, and it doesn't need to look down on the people still asleep inside the mass mind because it remembers, honestly, how recently it was asleep there too. The test is simple. Silence used as power says nothing and needs nothing back. Silence used as superiority is loud in every way that matters, it just performs its loudness through withdrawal instead of words. You'll know which one you're practicing by how it feels from the inside. One is peaceful. The other is still performing, just for a smaller, more secret audience. The one inside your own head. There's one more thing worth saying plainly, because it's the difference between this working and this backfiring. None of this requires you to punish anyone. You don't need a dramatic exit, a pointed silence aimed at making someone feel it, a withdrawal performed loudly enough that it becomes its own kind of announcement. That's still the old game, just wearing a colder costume. The real version of this is quieter than that, and less interested in anyone's reaction at all. You're not going silent at people. You're simply no longer available for a performance you used to think was required. That distinction matters because one version keeps you tangled in exactly the dynamic you're trying to leave, and the other actually sets you free of it. So here's where this lands. You are not becoming invisible. You are becoming unreadable to anyone who hasn't earned access to the real version of you. That's the whole shift, condensed into one sentence. Results replace announcements, actions replace justifications, and the people who need a play-by-play to trust you, were never going to trust the finished version anyway. Somewhere, right now, there's a decision you've been narrating instead of making. A change you've been explaining instead of simply becoming. Jung's entire body of work points to the same quiet, uncomfortable conclusion. The explaining was never for you. It was for everyone else's comfort at the cost of your own becoming. So here's the choice, and it really is this binary. You can keep translating your growth into a language other people find comfortable, or you can let it stay untranslated and let your life do the explaining instead. One of those paths keeps you legible, liked, and exactly the same. The other one costs you an audience and gives you back your entire life. If you've made it this far, you already know which one you're choosing. Stop announcing it. Go become it.